Hello, so today I will be discussing Chapter 13.9, Relative Competitive Abilities, Change Along Environmental Gradients, and Chapter 13.10, Interspecific Competition Influences the Niche of a Species. Environmental conditions change and so does the relative competitive abilities of species, and this is what Mike Austin and colleagues highlights in the presentation that I will be talking right now. There are several greenhouse studies conducted to explore the changing nature of interspecific competition among plant species. This is primarily in accordance with experimental gradients of nutrient availability. In the first experiment, researchers examined 6 plant species of thistles along a gradient of nutrient availability. It was divided into 2 groups and are grown under 11 different nutrient treatments. They are given 14 weeks until harvest and their dry weights were determined. In figure 13.8 shown below, responses of 6 plant species along the nutrient gradient for monoculture and mixture are shown. Figure 13.8a shows the monocultured plant species with C. lanatus has the highest level while C. nutans falls at the lowest level in terms of biomass weight under the relative nutrient concentration applied. On figure 13.8b, it shows the mixed species. This time, the species of S. marianum dominates in biomass weight, while C. nutans falls at the lowest, same as to the monocultured group. It is important to note that there are 2 results that emerged from the first experiment. First, plants grown in mixture differed in pattern from the response of the monocultured plants. This is because there is competition in the mixed group, and secondly, the competitive abilities of each species change along the nutrient gradient. These can be seen in figure 13.8. So moving on, another responses were presented but only to the 3 dominant thistle species. Their levels can also be seen in figure 13.8. So in figure 13.9 below shows that 3 dominant plant species responses. As you can see, the 3 dominant species has the same level of ecological performance in 1.0 level despite changes in nutrient concentration, but they differ accordingly in the lower numbers. In this experiment, monocultured Spartina alterniflora or smooth cordgrass dominates the low marsh habitats, while Spartina patens dominates the high marsh habitats. However, changes to nutrient availability due to waterlogging, salinity, and oxygen availability that causes physical stress influence the responses. This is with or without competition. S. alterniflora transferred to high marsh habitats while S. patens transferred to the low marsh habitats. The researchers concluded that S. alterniflora dominates the physically stressful low marsh habitats because of its ability to persist in anoxic of low oxygen soils. S. patens, on the other hand, is limited to high marsh habitats because of its inability to tolerate the harsh physical conditions in frequently flooded low marsh habitats. So now I will be discussing interspecific competition influences the niche of a species. So we previously defined ecological niche of a species as the range of physical and chemical conditions under which it can persist and the essential resources it uses, and drew the distinction between the concepts of fundamental and realized niche. Competitive release is a term coined when a species invades an island that is free of potential competitors, moves into habitats it never occupied on a mainland, and becomes more abundant. Such expansion may also follow when a competing species is removed from a community, allowing remaining species to move into microhabitats they previously could not occupy. An example of this concept is presented by Daniel Bolnick and others focusing on the lake ecosystem. They used 3 spine stickleback fish and tested it for short-term changes in the feeding niche, and using juvenile cutthroat trout and prickly sculpin as competitors, and manipulated the absence of presence of these 2 competitors. The result is, when the food competition was removed from the trout, the diversity of the prey consumed by the stickleback increased significantly as shown respectively in figure 13.14. And that is all for my report, and I hope you learned something and have a great day.
Coexistence of species often involves partitioning available resources. Observations of similar species sharing the same habitat suggest that they coexist by partitioning available resources. Animals use different kinds and sizes of food, feed at different times, or forage in different areas, whereas plants require different proportions of nutrients or have different tolerances for light and shade. Each species exploits a portion of the resources unavailable to others, resulting in differences among co-occurring species that would not be expected purely as a result of chance. Field studies provide many reports of apparent resource partitioning. One example involves 3 species of annual plants growing together on prairie soil abandoned 1 year after plowing. Each plant exploits a different part of the soil. The bristly foxtail has a fibrous, shallow root system, while the Indian mallow has a sparse branched taproot extending to intermediate depths, and the smartweed has a taproot that is moderately branched in the upper soil layer and develops mostly below the rooting zone of other species. Apparent resource partitioning is also common among related animal species that share the same habitat and draw on a similar resource base. For example, wildcats inhabiting the Middle East. Differences in the size of canine teeth among wildcat species showed that each species have different preys. Intraspecific and interspecific competition for food has resulted in natural selection favoring the observed differences, thereby reducing the overlap in the types and sizes of prey that are taken. When the role of past competition on the evolution of characteristics of different species cannot be directly observed, an ecologist named Joseph Connell used studies that examined differences in the characteristics of subpopulations of a species that face different competitive environments. These studies were used to back up the hypothesis that resource portioning is a product of coevolution between competing species. One specific study that was used was the study of Peter Grant and Rosemary Grant, which involved two Darwin's finches of the Galapagos Islands. On the large island of Santa Cruz, medium and small ground finches coexist. However, on the island of Los Hermanos only the small ground finch lives, and on the island of Daphne Major only the medium ground finch lives. On the island of Santa Cruz where the two species coexist, the beak sizes of the two species were different and not overlapping. However, on the island of Los Hermanos and Daphne Major where the two species lived separately, the beak sizes of the two species were found to be intermediate and overlapping. These patterns suggest that on islands where the two species coexist, competition for food resulted in natural selection favoring medium ground finch individuals with a large beak size that can effectively exploit larger seeds, while also favoring small ground finch individuals that feed on smaller seeds. The outcome of this competition was a shift in feeding niches. When the shift involves features of the species' morphology, behavior, or physiology, it is referred to as character displacement. Competition is a complex interaction involving biotic and abiotic factors. Competition is a complex interaction that seldom involves the interaction between two species for a single limiting resource. Competition involves a variety of environmental factors that directly influence survival, growth, and reproduction, factors that vary in both time and space. An example of this can be shown by what happened with the wolves and coyotes in North America. The decline of gray wolf populations throughout much of North America have been paralleled by a dramatic expansion in the range of coyotes. Evidence from areas in which wolves have been reintroduced suggests that the expansion of coyotes was in part a result of competitive release from wolf populations over the past century.